If you're a fan of the golden age of JRPGs, I think you're going to want to settle in for this one, because the 8-Bit Adventures 2 is going to bring you back to that era. This reminded me of games I loved as a kid. The original Final Fantasy, Dragon Warrior, or Quest 3, Chrono Trigger, just to name a few. And while it gave me that same feeling I fondly remember playing those games, it also adds some modern touches and features which made this much more enjoyable than it would have been had they stuck strictly to the 90s formula. Its graphics and sound nail it. It's very colorful and varied, so many different environments you'll traverse through, and with each one feeling unique in its own ways. My only complaint with the visuals is the addition of screen shake. This effect in any game gives me a minor feeling of nausea. So please, developers, if you're gonna add this to your game, make sure to include a toggle in the menus to turn it off. I know I'm not alone here. The music is really catchy and felt appropriate for the style. I wouldn't put the soundtrack up against retro greats, but that also wouldn't be a fair comparison. The overworld theme in particular was one of my favorites. Now, the story in 8-Bit Adventures 2 is going to follow a glitch as an antagonist. This glitch has the ability to hack and mind control living beings. It's a terrifying villain with horrifying intentions, wanting to reshape the world into chaos. That's the main driving factor behind the story, and as far as the protagonist goes, there's a whole bunch of them. All 7 of your playable characters felt like protagonists, and it didn't seem like there was just one and then the rest were just side characters. There's a lot of dialogue in this game, a little bit too much dialogue in this game, but it will revolve a lot of this around characters and their relationships, and in some cases, maybe even romantic relationships. For a game without voice acting, the characters' personalities and intentions came through pretty well. But again, my main complaint with the story and the dialogue as a whole is this did feel very, very long-winded. And in a game like this, I was kinda hoping for a little bit less of that. Modern RPGs like Xenoblade Chronicles or the more modern Final Fantasies and Dragon Quest titles, it's a little bit easier for me to tolerate long sections of dialogue because they're voiced. And I'm not saying I expect voice acting in this, I certainly don't, but it's just a little off-putting for me to spend so much time reading through walls and walls of text. I would have liked this to be a little bit more streamlined and some of the fat cut off of the dialogue. But with that said, I highly enjoyed all of the different characters, how they interacted with one another, and you can really tell how they feel about each other and how much they want to help one another throughout these sequences. By far, my favorite part of this game was the combat. Just in general, I'm a huge fan of turn-based combat, and this kind of implemented a retro style, but also with some modern touches that you don't even see in games that I really enjoyed, and it does some things that I would have liked to have seen in like the Octopath Traveler series. So I do want to touch on those really briefly. And the first is that, like I mentioned, you will eventually have 7 total characters at your disposal. And you can freely swap in between these characters during battle. And when you do swap, you do not lose your turn. So you can still act offensively or defensively after swapping. So it encourages you to mix and match your party. And for a game where you only control 3 at a time, this was a huge component to it. To compare that again to Octopath Traveler, in that game you have 8 characters and you can have 4 at a time, but I very rarely would switch because when you would switch, you would lose a turn. So it felt like that game punished you for wanting to switch, whereas in 8-Bit Adventures 2, they really reward you for wanting to switch, because there's times where you're going to get into a battle and you might not have the ideal party. So rather than trying to make the party that you have work, you can switch. Okay, this character's not good right now, let me swap in this one. And I absolutely love that about the combat here. Aside from that, each of the characters has their own abilities. Some have magic, some use AP instead, which are ability points. Each character has their own Omega, which is basically like an ultimate. There's a meter at the bottom of the screen, and this is shared, so you can only use this once before it'll deplete. It's not like each character has their own ultimate meter. There's even some team-up abilities, which will have 2 party members working together to execute a move. To assist in the combat, you have your standard level up system. Your stats will go up as you earn XP. You'll obviously earn XP during fights. The battles in this are not random. You can always see the enemies on the screen. It is technically possible to grind in this if you respawn the enemies, but they don't respawn very quickly on their own, and it requires one of the save point little sparkly spots for you to do it manually. You have your standard equipment system. There's also augments that you'll earn, and these are like passive bonuses that you can apply, and you'll find these in the world or earn them from side quests and things like that. So these allowed an extra bit of customization to the character builds that I really appreciated. And then again, you have your standard items, your healing items and status effect cleansing items, and there's Phoenix Downs, which will revive fallen allies and things like that. This is all stuff that we've seen before. It worked then, it works now, so I'm not going to dive too deep into it. A huge part of the game that kept me interested throughout the entirety of it, and this is a long game. Like, you could expect at least, I would say, a minimum of 30 hours, unless you're like an absolute master at JRPGs that are turn-based and whiz right through this. Expect to get at least 30 hours out of this. The variety across the bosses, the enemies, the areas, all these things kept it interesting throughout the duration of that time. And I'm really impressed that it was able to keep my interest that long, because, like I said, the dialogue was a bit too long-winded and broke up the flow for me. I'm not saying that's a bad approach and that they shouldn't have done that. I'm just saying, for me, there was a bit too much dialogue. I like to have a more fast-paced experience, and since you can sprint in this, it did assist with me going quickly through it. But the variety across the bosses, the enemies, the areas, all of these things kept it interesting, and that's pretty impressive for an 8-bit style RPG. I wasn't expecting for this to be on par with more modern RPGs I've played that I've already named, but it managed to keep it feeling interesting. The beginning of the game starts out really slow, so if you're the type that needs to be interested in like the first hour, I'm going to say that you're going to need to be a little bit more patient, because you're going to bounce in between characters a few times before you really start to settle in, and it feels like now you're starting to get what the game actually has to offer, and you have a proper party, and you understand your goal and things like that. And throughout this process, one thing that they do really, really well that older games didn't have any of this is that they do teach you the fundamental mechanics of the game. And you can always review these freely in the menu if you forget something. So each aspect of like the combat and things like that are introduced to you very slowly. So I would say expect like 3 to 4 hours before you really start to kind of get cut loose and feel like, all right, now I'm getting into it. And then a few more hours after that is when the game really is like, okay, here's our difficulty now. Because suddenly you start to get crushed with status effects and things, and party members might fall. And that's when you really need to understand why you should switch mid-battle. So as a whole, I would say expect to take at least 6 to 7 hours before you're getting like the full 8-Bit Adventures 2 experience. And that's not to say that the first 6 or 7 hours is bad, just expect it to be a little bit slower, really establishing the story and the mechanics and all those things before they cut you loose and let you go on your own, figure things out a little bit, understand that there's side quests, and at that point you'll also have all the different mechanics available to you. So now in conclusion, 8-Bit Adventures 2 really surpassed my expectations because it managed to modernize some things that I don't like about retro RPGs, but also even more modern ones like the instance I pointed out with Octopath Traveler. It has so much variety in it, and it genuinely tells an interesting story. It controls really great. The save anywhere concept is something that I'd love to see more often in RPGs. It has some subtle nods to past RPGs that I picked up on and things like that. And although I didn't play the original 8-Bit Adventures, I think there was some nods to that in here in the story that were over my head, but that was the impression that I got. But as a whole, 8-Bit Adventures 2 gets an easy recommendation from me. I had a lot of fun with this, and it impressed me in a lot of ways. So I hope that if you decide to play this, you have as much fun with it as I did. Hope you found this review helpful. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.